Vladimir Putin was actually speaking with a Russian submarine crew, and he really dropped an actual bombshell. I'll pull up a video. What is happening today is in principle clear. Along the entire line of combat contact, our troops hold the strategic initiative, and there's every reason to believe, as I said just recently, we will finish them off, them being Ukraine. There's reason to believe that we will finish them off. He said Ukraine should be essentially, its political system needs to be administered by the United Nations, almost like a plebiscite. And that in this administration, those who are going to enact this and work together on ensuring that Ukraine has free and fair elections are going to be not just the United States, not just possibly European countries, but also Russia's partners. He said explicitly Russia's partners, and he named China, India, Brazil, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Essentially what he says is our partners, essentially BRICS plus the DPRK, need to be involved in this. What do you make of this? It's a very strong statement. It's a really a big bombshell that sends a pretty big message to the Trump administration, which is undergoing these negotiations.
Well, I would suggest that it's actually not a bombshell. He is saying exactly what he said in June of 2024 when he spoke to the Russian senior officials of the Russian Foreign Ministry. He said it then. Now, a little over 3 weeks ago, I asked Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, that precise question. Are you guys now seeing some light between what President Putin said in June of 2024 and the United States, that you're going to back away from some of those? And Lavrov said, no, yet. But he said it in English. He said no. And Maria Zakharova, the spokeswoman for the foreign ministry, she's repeated the same thing. Sergei Rybakov, the deputy foreign minister, he said the same thing. Medvedev, same thing. Peskov, Kremlin spokesman, same thing. We gotta listen to, Ray McGovern's always said that all we got to do is listen to what the Russians say. You don't have to be, Kreskin the analyst. I'm a mind reader. I can figure out what the Russians are trying to do. Just listen to what they say. And Putin, what he said in that submarine, not a single deviation from what he said almost a year ago in June of 2024. The conditions are real clear. They're going. Russia considers the 4 oblasts that it now controls in former Ukraine territory, Zaporizhia, Kherson, Donetsk, Luhansk. They are now part of the Russian Federal Republic. They are Russian. Russia's not going to let them go. What Ukraine needs to do is pull all of its forces, all of its troops out of those 4 republics. That's number one. Number two, they got to have elections because Zelensky is an illegal president. He canceled elections, declared martial law, and stayed in office. Russia says, even if we negotiate a deal with him, he's not legally constituted to sign anything. We want to deal with somebody who's legal, but not going to deal with any Nazis. We're not going to allow Nazis to continue in power in Ukraine. And we're going to want an internationally supervised election. That Russian speakers are not going to be all laws and restrictions on Russian speakers who are Ukrainian citizens are going to be lifted. So, Putin's made it very clear. And the United States just better damn well listen.
I agree with you, Larry, that it is not a bombshell what Putin is laying out. He's been saying this. It is very surprising, Colonel Wilkerson, is he's also now bringing in this new world order, this multipolar world order that the United States as a whole sees from its threat assessment. The biggest threat to the United States is national security. So this is a pretty big moment, it seems.
First, let me say that I agree with almost every word, probably every word, every period, every semicolon, and every colon that Larry just said. But Sergei Lavrov said something that really struck me. And Trump ought to think about this, ponder it as best he can with that brain of his. more than a minute. Sergey said Greenland is less important to the United States than Ukraine is to us. Now, there's a certain amount of tongue in cheek there, but Sergey was saying Ukraine, with the NATO presence, is existential threat to us. Greenland could never be an existential threat to the United States. You may want it, but you want it with a desire that probably won't be fulfilled. If it is, it'll be up to the Danes to do it. We, on the other hand, will fight to the 300,000 deaths we've already achieved, and then maybe more, in order to prevent Ukraine from being a NATO tool or even resembling slightly a NATO tool. And so these are our conditions. That's a pretty stark way of putting it. And it's a way of putting it that I would think Trump would understand and others in the administration would understand. But it is that stark, really. And the idea that Biden conjured, and unpresidentially to the max, cast out there on the waves almost on a weekly basis that Putin was an animal, that he was diseased of the brain. Same thing about Xi Jinping. What kind of a president would say things like that, even if he believed about an opponent in the world who had the capability to smite him if he wanted to, or to make his life really miserable if he wanted to? What president would do? But Biden did, showing you how enfeebled that gentleman was. That's the best word I can use for him. So I agree with Larry that Russia's got all the cards here. We have none. In fact, I would say we're operating from a deficit. If there are 52 cards in a poker deck, Putin's got 54, including the two jokers, and we've got nothing. We don't have the cardboard around the deck. That's a very difficult situation for a bombastic person like Trump to go into and conduct successful negotiations. So I don't predict success there. I don't know what I should predict except more and more tragedy. I don't think we're headed for a peace.
I am very actually cautious of these future negotiations, just given how they've gone thus far, knowing what I know about Russia, which is that they're not going to give up these core demands, these root causes that they've been harping on this whole time. And now Putin is saying, we have the strategic initiative, we will wipe them out. But if there is no legitimate peace deal, then this is how it's going to go. I'm constantly wondering, well, how does Trump actually respond to this, given that the United States is really facing a crisis here? I saw that threat assessment, Larry, and that's a big, long list of very powerful countries that the intelligence community is assessing as the big threats to the United States. And I didn't see much change in the U.S.'s strategy overall from the point of view of the intelligence apparatus in how the United States is going to conduct its affairs under Trump.
Well, first, that the threat assessment's a tunnel vision assessment. Right. They only look at each individual country almost as if they're independent from each other, that they don't have any interaction, that they're not pursuing any projects of cooperation, collaboration together. I mean, it's just, it really is. I described it as a hot mess. It's juvenile. It's sophomoric. It's a shameful product that we spend, hundreds of millions of dollars on an intelligence capability that produces crap like that. There have been a couple of really important developments where Putin speaking to the industrialists of Russia. He talked about sanctions, and he basically told him, he says, look, guys, we're never, ever going to be in a period where we're not facing some sort of sanctions from the West. If you're making your economic and your production calculations on, we're going to get to a period where relations with the West are going to be so great there won't be any more sanctions, forget about it. That's never going to happen, which is why we're pursuing BRICS and setting up an alternate financial system. He said that. That doesn't mean he wants to be antagonistic with the West, but he is now, Russia has awakened to the fact they can no longer trust the West as an actual stable partner. If anybody out there has ever had a crazy girlfriend or a crazy boyfriend, and you kept trying to make the relationship work with them, and they kept getting crazier by the moment. There comes a time where you cut off and say, okay, we're not going to have that romantic relationship. We're not going to have that kind of relationship. You may still be cordial to them. You may still say hi to them if you see them in the bar, but you're not going to get into a deep relationship with them. And that's where Russia is right now with the West. They have made the decision, our future is not with the United States. Our future is with China, with India, South Africa, Brazil, Indonesia, Iran, the countries that have joined BRICS. They're moving to the global South. The other thing Putin said, which, should wake up Trump and his company, he says, look, if by the middle of April, Ukraine has not accepted any of these terms, has not agreed to any of this, Novorossiya, that we're going to take that. Novorossiya is basically all land that is to the east of the Dnieper River, as well as the left bank or the west bank of the Dnieper River, which means Kiev. So they're going to take Odessa, Mykolaiv, and at that point, the Russian demands will again shift. So we went from, I guess it was March of 2022, where the Russians signed off on a Ukrainian proposal that would have left Donetsk and Luhansk as part of Ukraine with international guarantees. They signed that agreement, and then Ukraine walked away from it under U.S. pressure. So they moved from there to June of 2024, where Putin said, all 4 oblasts, Ukraine have elections, get your army the hell out of our country. And now the next stop is we're taking everything east of the Dnieper, and we're taking everything along the Black Sea, including Odessa. And you can either negotiate that or we're going to do it militarily, but that's what we're going to do. That's what we need to understand.
Putin's call for a UN administrative body that would facilitate Ukrainian election, Putin's suggestion that Russia's partners, China, DPRK, BRICS countries in particular, are going to be and should be a major part of this process.
Well, I think all of that is inevitable, and I think it should be. It's time that we started recognizing the rest of the world. It's time that we started. Ask Xi Jinping how many countries he has sanctions on. Ask Putin how many countries he has sanctions on. Ask OFAC how many countries we have sanctions on. 32. About 25% of the 8.5, 9 billion people in the world are laboring today under our sanctions. This can't last. Yeah. And people in the BRICS complex, Putin, Xi, they know that. And they're working ardently and, in fact, I think fairly astutely to bring about what Xi calls the ASEAN community type atmosphere within this group, where they're driven by economics, by commerce, by trade, by exchanges and such, and not by wanting to fight wars with one another, not by military industrial complexes and such. And I think that's the future. I think Chas Freeman has the right word for that. It's not multipolar. Poles are like this, Poles depict, somebody's up here, somebody's here. It's a multinodal world, and that's what they're after. And those nodes are going to include everyone but us. Now, they're going to have to initially deal with us because we still have a lot of residual economic and financial power. And we still basically have the fundamental currency for the world. But they're working on that too, as Larry suggested. And I don't think it's going to take as much time to do all this as some of my erstwhile agreeers believe, thinking it's going to take, the rest of this century and so forth. I don't think so at all, especially when you confront the other things that are challenging us, like no nuclear weapons treaties and the need to get to that, and the climate crisis. This is going to have to be done in concert. It can't possibly be done by any individual nation or even a group of nations like the G20 or G8 might have been in the past. It's got to be done by everyone with the bigger powers, BRICS, if you will, China, Russia, India, Brazil, and others leading. hopefully the United States will join somewhere down there. Otherwise, we'll be the only ones that are caught out in the mess when the climate crisis becomes really intense. And if we're still pumping greenhouse gases, we'll be largely responsible for what the others are unable to do. So they've got to drag us in, kicking and screaming if necessary in some respects. But the world's changing. It's changing dramatically, and it's changing rather rapidly, much more rapidly than, for example, Powell and I thought in 2003, 2002, or even in 92 and 93 when we were euphoric over destroying 50,000 nuclear warheads and doing the kinds of things that we thought were necessary to bring Russia into the world as a responsible power after the Warsaw Pact had collapsed. I remember Powell going to Warsaw itself and talking to former generals from the Warsaw Pact and telling them about our Constitution and how that meant everything to him. As a soldier, that meant everything to him. And they were stunned by that. They were stunned that he would make that kind of admission. Well, that's done. That's toast. That's the past. We stopped doing what we should be doing to accommodate this new world the moment H.W. Bush was unelected as president of the United States and Bill Clinton took his place. We stopped doing what we should do, and we've been doing what we shouldn't do ever since, and we're going to pay dearly for it.
One very interesting part of this threat assessment by the intelligence community, intelligence apparatus, they named, of course, the 4 big players, which many people thought Trump was going to take a different direction on: Russia, China, Iran, DPRK as the big threats. At the very end of the document, though, this is what they said about Russia and China. Cooperation between Russia and China has the greatest potential to pose enduring risks to U.S. interests. Their leaders probably believe they are more capable of countering perceived U.S. aggression together than alone, given a shared belief that the U.S. is seeking to constrain each country. Just wanted your comments on this threat assessment. How much does it actually influence U.S. policy, given we know not just about history, but what's going on right now?
Well, again, it's part of the U.S. disconnect from reality. I asked Sergei Lavrov that specific question. I pointed out to him, I said, look, I can't tell you the number both of Trump officials and Washington pundits, both journalists and think tank folks, who insist that our real play now is, and they'll say things like, oh, there's no way the Russians want to be tied to the Chinese. They just, the bunch of yellow monkeys, they can't, it's racist. They don't want to be around those people. They're more naturally aligned with us. So we just got to, is like completely clueless about what we're doing to Russia with sanctions and everything else, helping kill Russians through supporting Ukraine. They act like, oh yeah, we just, we get Russia on our side, man, then we can go after China. I mean, they really believe this. That's Elbridge Colby, who is one of the nominees to be the number 3 guy at DOD. He believes that. Oh, we got to stop this war in Ukraine so we can focus on China, and we got to get Russia on our side. And you notice in that assessment, they assess Russia as the junior partner to China. Nonsense. Russia stands as an equal partner. Yeah, it's not as big as China, but on a per capita basis, it has just as robust a defense production capability, more so than China. China still has not been able to produce its own domestic airliner. Russia has, using all parts from within Russia. But China needs Russia's oil and gas. Absolutely needs it. A reliable source. And so when I asked Lavrov this, he sort of smiled and said, yeah, through history, Russia and China, we've been at odds. But we recognize that we now have a need to work together. And he said, look, the Chinese have a completely different time horizon than us. And he, raised his hand and pointed out far into the future and laughed. I mean, he acknowledges that, the Chinese have their way of looking at the world. The Russians have their way, but they recognize, sort of as I guess was it attributed to Benjamin Franklin, if we don't hang together, we shall surely hang separately. And that's, I think that's their attitude.
I agree with that. I spent some time with the president of the Central Party School, who at the time was vice president of China, as I recall his official title, who became the premier, Hu Jintao. And I was so impressed with the strategists I met in that school and the people with whom I had dinner and talked to and everything. Their vision is far longer than probably any other state in the world. And Putin's right when he describes them that way. I do think there is a historical inhibition, if you will, in Moscow elites, St. Petersburg elites, it used to be, whatever, to being too close to China. And it comes from the fact that even today, the Chinese are more important in the Far East, what we used to call the FETVD, the Far Eastern military theater for Russia, for the Soviet Union. There are more Chinese than there are Russians. And every day, many of them cross the rivers and come back and go back again. But there's more commerce and more trade actually going on between the Chinese and the Russians in that part of Russia than there is going on between anybody toward the Urals. I mean, and the Russians have always sort of feared that. So to have put them in this position where they're defying, from Catherine on at least, and I would say they're even defying it from Prince Nevsky in the battle on the ice at Lake Peepus, to put them in the disposition where they do want to be allied, not because they're racist, but because of that fear of that great power that lies with all those hordes of Chinese down there so close. To put them in another position where they want to be, and I think Larry's right on this, they do want to be now, allied with China rather than in some sort of effective stasis is remarkable. We did it.
Yeah.
It's remarkable.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we pushed them away and we're still pushing them away. So I think that's a tragic strategic error that we will pay for dearly.